You know what's worse than having no sales team at all? Well, that's having the wrong sales team. You know, most businesses think that they've hired a closer when in reality, they've hired a glorified order taker. And that specific blind spot I'm talking about, well, it's costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars in missed revenue every single year. So in this video, let's break down what is causing that, how you can find that blind spot, and ensure that you're not having lost revenue due to opportunity cost. Now, let's look at the dangerous illusion of having a closer, right? Most business owners, you know, they are very proud people, like myself as well, and you always want to ensure that you have and build the best team. We all know the saying that you're only as good as your weakest team member, right? Or your sales is only as good as your weakest closer, which is extremely important, right? But let's just say, for an example, you go out there, you hire someone, you know, they sound decent, you know, you do the interview process, they say all the right things, the resume looks good, and you know, they show up on calls and you think, oh wow, the sales problem is solved, and you move on, you go back to operations, you go back to marketing, and you do all the things and then suddenly ignore the sales team, right? But you know, the real question you should be asking yourself, right, and this is all data backed, is are they actually closing deals, right? That is the most important thing here, and that is one of the most important things we have to look at as founders, right? Or as a sales manager. Now, you have to ask yourself the following questions, you know, are their show up rate or is their show up rate optimized? Are they collecting cash? Or are they actually just pushing for follow-ups and pushing one call to the next, to the next, to the next? And a quick thing that we can touch on here is also their time to close, right? Compare that with current reps, because a lot of fake closers, they cannot close, they're just sales reps, right? And there's a humongous difference between sales reps and closers. Sales reps are glorified order takers, right? They say what the closer or the prospect wants to hear, they're moving them along, but they simply cannot move them across the line. And you'll notice this upon your closers, where you look at the sales cycle, whoever has the longest sales cycle is generally the glorified order takers. Just a hint there, since they are simply moving the prospect along the lines, you know, saying what they want to say, but at the end of the day, they're not collecting cash and closing the deals, right? That's the difference between a closer and a salesperson. A closer actually gets shit done and closes the deals, right? Whereas a glorified order taker or a salesperson would just move the person along the sales process and, you know, tell them what they want to hear or tell the prospect what they want to hear. Now, most founders, they are confusing activity for productivity. And there's a massive, massive difference there, right? We want productivity, cash collected. We do not want just activity, showing up and you know, just moving the ball forward, right? Now, let's look at the hidden cost of mediocrity, right? Now, the biggest thing you have to concentrate here is you should not, as a founder, tolerate mediocrity, right? And why do I say this? Well, first of all, let's look at your team culture and your team dynamic. If you're actually going to tolerate mediocrity, right, meaning that, you know, your top sales guy has a 20% close rate and your bottom sales guy is sitting at a 10% close rate, you should not tolerate mediocrity, because if you do and you tolerate mediocrity, this sends a massive message to your team, right? And it sends the wrong message to your team, where they can just slack off, their job is secured, they can just do the average, and they do not have to thrive, right, in order to be part of your team. No, absolutely not. You need to maintain a level of excellence and keep your closers accountable. If you are not keeping your closers accountable as a sales manager, or even worse, as a founder, right, they are going to slack off, they are going to cut corners, because at the end of the day, what is the worst thing here, and the worst thing, one of the worst things that can happen, is that they get in this mindset of, oh, there are just endless leads, right? I will get the sale, I just need to rep the reps. That is completely wrong and unacceptable, and you need to make it, you know, you need to tell your team this on your morning huddles, that it is unacceptable for them to just not give a shit about the leads and just take the leads as they come, because, oh, there will always be more leads to come. No, because what your closers do not realize is that there is a cost per lead, right? You as a business founder, you would recognize and understand that. But sometimes as closers specifically, they do not sometimes understand that because they're not business owners, right? They're in the trenches, they're closing deals, and they do not understand that, hey, these leads and these calls that you are talking to, they cost money, right? And that's a very important thing that you need to reiterate to your sales team, is that mediocrity will not be tolerated, right? So the worst closer on your team should always be in a position of, being mentally scared that they are going to lose their job. Why? Because that is the truth. As a founder, your bottom salesperson should periodically always be rotated out, right? Meaning that your top closer, their job should be secured, right? And they should feel happy about them or about what they're accomplishing and their roles. But your bottom closer, they should always be scared that they are going to lose their job, right? I promise you that fear is a great motivator in closers, right? Because at the end of the day, they do not want to go find a different job. If you have a proven offer and you have leads coming in, they do not want to move, right? And they do not want to, go work in a different industry or go work for a different company, right? And it's your job as the founder or the sales manager to, number one, motivate them, right? And also make it known if they're slacking off, you have to put them in what's known as a PIP, a performance improvement plan, right? Where you are daily talking to them. You're in huddles with them daily. You're in there talking with them, doing call reviews, figuring out what they are doing wrong, and also more importantly, give them the top closers calls, right? Have them review the top closers calls, right? You should not by any means tolerate mediocrity. It is your job as a sales manager or as the founder to create a competitive environment, right? You need to, in your morning huddles, discuss things such as your closing rate, right? For all the closers, there needs to be a leaderboard, right? Where everybody can see how each other is doing. This creates competitiveness, right? This creates an environment or culture where you're now competing. You have your closers competing to be the top, right? And that's another thing to motivate them and to go into that topic. Have quarterly prizes, right? I don't know what your offer is, obviously, because we haven't talked, but if your offer is good enough and you're bringing, over, $25,000 a month in revenue, number one, we would love to work with you at Sales Match to place 0.5% top talent in your business. More on that below. But you need to have quarterly prizes, right? Whether that's a quick vacation. I'm not a huge fan of vacations because at the end of the day, you don't want your closers going on vacation because you want them taking calls. Materialistic things such as watches, right? Maybe a nice dinner or anything else you can think of, right? That, motivate your closers enough to fight for that top position, right? And quarterly, you need to make it known that the bottom person, right, the bottom salesperson, whether that's an SDR, a setter, or a closer, will get terminated if they don't improve their performance. That is just the cutthroat mentality you need to maintain in order to run a business at a high level where you are, doing several million on a monthly basis, right? Because you deserve it as a founder, your business deserves it, and your marketing team certainly does not deserve a closer who's just going to trash away the leads, right? The marketing team is working in conjunction with the sales team to provide the best possible client possible, or best client possible for your business, right? So it is very important that there's synergy there and that you hand, number one, your best leads to your top closers as well. That's very, very important. Now, also remember, there is a massive opportunity cost to a bad hire, right? Not only are you giving them leads that you have paid for, right? But let's just say that they are, a terrible closer and, they're sitting at half of the closing percentage as your top closer. That is a big deal because not only are you wasting money on the cost per call that you are handing them, but you are losing revenue through the opportunity cost of giving those high quality leads to your top closer, because your top closer would have closed several more people and collected that cash, right? So a rule of thumb moving forward, if you have, and you should have, several channels of lead sources, your top closer should get your best leads no matter what. They deserve it, right? And that's another way to motivate your closers, is to say on your morning huddles and to remind them that the top closer on the team is going to get the best leads. That is how it works, right? The bottom closer is going to get, quote unquote, the worst leads, right? And they have to prove themselves in order to climb the ranks, right? And get better leads, right? They have to prove themselves. And sometimes the rep isn't the issue itself. It might be you as the sales manager or as the founder if you do not have a sales manager, right? And sometimes you're just missing it completely, and that is okay. There is sometimes a blind spot in your business, and I'm going to tell you how to fix or to find that blind spot, right? Now, the first thing is first here is, you onboard a closer and you just say good luck, right? You give them outdated training, you give them call reviews that are several months old, right? That in itself, you're off to the wrong start. You need to hand them, your top closers, most recent calls, right, of the closes that they've gotten. And in addition to that, also the closes that they have not gotten, the tougher calls, right? I see this mistake all the time where founders give only their top, or when they hire a new closer, they give their the new hire only the best calls of the people that have been closed by your top closer. That is a crucial mistake, right? Because obviously those calls went very well. What about the calls that did not go well? You need to hand those call recordings to your new hire as well, along with updated call recordings and call transcripts, as well as obviously the training about your offer, your company, and so on and so forth. That's very, very, very important. Now, once they've gone through that training, obviously you need to put them through mock interviews, right? As a sales manager, you need to put them through mock interviews, right? Drill them, ask them the most frequently asked questions, right? Put them through the rigor before they get on the call with you, right? And this is something we do here at Sales Match. Well before we place reps within a company, we interview them. We make sure that they have the experience. We make sure that their camera, their background, that they're ready to perform at a high level for remote closing, right? And that they're trained on things such as objection handling and so on and so forth. But more on that below. If you're a business owner and you want to find top talent, please click the link below and schedule a call with our team, and we'll be able to see how we can help you out. But moving on, in addition to that, once you provided them with all of that training, you need to be reviewing their calls at least for the first month, right? Every single day for as many calls as you can review. You need to review their calls and be in the trenches, quote unquote, with them. Why do I say this? Well, you need to be able to help them with objection handling, the way that I handle things, specifically here at Sales Match, is that, and this is how I explain it to the sales guys as well here, and to our top closers, right? I'm here as a sales manager, right? Not me specifically, but our sales manager is there to view things from a 30,000 foot perspective, right? When you're closing and you're in the trenches, right? You're consistently thinking about what to say next, how to guide the call, right? Because as a closer, you need to ask targeted questions that the prospect is going to answer to, so that you can guide the call towards the close, right? Sometimes necessarily you're not concentrating on the prospect's body language, what they're actually saying, right? Not what's coming out of their mouth, but how they're saying it, what they're saying, what the meaning behind that is. And that's where a sales manager can come in and review those calls. And the best thing to do is to review those calls through Zoom live with your closer on the call, right? Because then you can point things out specifically and say, if your closer's name is Ryan, or let's just say your closer's name is, Francisco. Francisco, this is what you need to be doing right, and here's where you went wrong with this. Can you see what happened here with the body language? The call diverted this way. Instead, say this and direct the call the other way. Those are all very important things that you need to be reviewing their calls at least for the first month, so you make sure that they're on the right path, right? You need to ramp them up as quick as possible to KPI, and then you can set them free a little bit more, right? And basically taper off the amount of call reviews you do, although you still need to be doing weekly call reviews as a sales manager. Now, the other big mistake that I see here that founders neglect is, and it's crazy to me that some founders do not track these things. You have to track the closing percentage. You have to track cash collected. You have to track average time to close, right? And in my opinion, the average time to close is even more important than the closing percentage. But there's a whole nother video to follow on that one. If you do want to see it, subscribe, and then you'll be able to see all the other videos to follow here. But point is, you need to be tracking your data, because if you're just driving blind, how on earth are you going to know who your top closer, who's your bottom closer, and who you need to be replacing, right? And the final thing is that, a lot of founders, what I see is that they do not have the correct training measures in place, or the training systems in place, like we talked about, right? Call reviews, outdated calls, outdated training, not providing them more information about your company. Frequently asked questions is a big thing. You have to provide these resources to your closers so they are armed and ready to come out swinging, and they have all the information ready and available to them, so that when those objections come their way, they can handle those objections spot on. Or when the frequently asked questions come their way, they can handle that immediately, right? Now, here's where I personally see why most founders struggle to see this blind spot, right? Number one, they get too emotionally attached to early hires, right? And sometimes KPIs get ignored. You hire your first closer, right? Big mistake here. You become buddies with the closer himself, right? And you get so emotionally attached that at the end of the day, they become your friend instead of your employee. And that's a big mistake. You always need to maintain that distance of like, I am the boss here and this is your employee. Don't create a culture necessarily of, that you don't give a shit about them or you don't care about them. That's very important that you ask them about their personal life as well. But definitely set boundaries in place, right? Now, the other mistake that I see here is that there's no benchmarking system, right? There's no tracking in place, right? And we've already kind of talked with that. And the fact here that I see most founders kind of delve into here is that they simply hire somebody, they look at their resume, they interview them, the closer speaks well, they have all the good signs, and once they place them and they're ready to go, the founders just move on to operations, fulfillment, putting out fires like every single founder always does on a day-to-day basis, but then they ignore sales. Remember, sales is what's going to drive your company forward. Without cash, your company will fail. You have to bring cash into the door, right? To pay for salaries, to keep the system up and going. So sales is the start of all of this, right? Without sales, your company will be doomed. And, honestly, some people want to dig in and they just, get disappointed, right? Most founders do not want to go through the effort of finding, interviewing, placing and training top 0.5% reps, right? They do not want to go through that effort, mainly because they cannot find that talent because top 0.5% closers are mainly always employed. They're not sitting on Indeed, LinkedIn jobs and on job boards and so on and so forth and Facebook groups. They are always hired, right? And alternatively, when they hire that top talent, they specifically do not concentrate on marketing and making sure that that top talent has leads to keep them busy on calls, because guess what? Top closers, they also realize their worth in the marketplace. And if you do not provide them with quality leads, right, through your marketing department, they will leave and find another job, right? Well, to solve all of this, here at Sales Match Method, we resolve that blind spot for you before we place reps inside of your business, right? We screen, test, and interview and deliver 0.5% top reps and closers, right? Whether that's closers, setters, or SDRs that have already been closing in the remote space and they are ready trained to win, right? So you're not just shooting a shot in the dark here. You're hiring top people that have already closed and are pre-vetted for remote closing, right? Now, each rep before we place them goes through objection handling, offer clarity, role playing, and is vetted on actual performance, not only based on their resume, but through their past employers, right? We make calls, we see how they, if they're going to be a good cultural fit, right? How they act, sometimes, closers will act very differently when they get interviewed, for obvious reasons, right? But we want to dig a little bit further and see, what were problems, before? Why are they looking for a job now? What happened in their previous role? We all uncover this through the vetting process, right? So we basically spot that blind spot so you do not have to. So if you're flying, blind, and you're tired of, unproven sales reps that are, just wasting leads in your business, book a call below and see if we can basically find that top talent for you and place and train and vet those top talent in your business. Just a heads up, we only work with, clients that are doing above $25,000 a month in revenue and have a proven offer that is generating leads all in all together. So at the end of the day, I really hope you found some useful information that you can extract from this video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.